Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Brains Behind AI. My name is Natalie, and I'm here with the main host, Ari, and today we have a special episode. Today, our guest is Gideon Mendels, and he is the CEO and co founder of Comet.ml, a leading provider of machine learning operations solutions that accelerate getting machine learning models into production. Before Comet.ml, Gideon founded GroupWize, where they trained and deployed over 50 natural language processing models on 15 different languages. His journey with NLP and speech recognition models began at Columbia University and also Google, where he worked on hate speech and deception detection. Gideon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Natalie. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, Gideon, you have an impressive background. I think we can do a show just exclusively focused on natural language processing and hate speech, given its importance in social media today. But before we sort of dive into it, your background is very, very impressive. We have Google and the number of natural language processing applications you've worked on. So, for our audience, can you take us through your personal journey on what got you interested in AI and machine learning, and how you've sort of made your way into machine learning, and then we can go into the work that got you excited?
Definitely. Thank you so much. I'm, again, super excited to be here. My path, I think, is similar to what a lot of people who are currently in machine learning went through. So I started my career as a software engineer about 15 or 16 years ago. And then I went to grad school, and I actually got into machine learning because I was trying to solve a problem that I couldn't solve with a traditional if statement or a regular expression. So specifically, I was working on a research project, and we were trying to collect data in low resource languages to build speech recognition models. And I built a system that collected the data, but it was tricky to identify what language it's in. And originally, like thinking like a software engineer, I started to put keywords and if statements. And then through that journey, I learned about natural language processing and language identification, and built my first model, my first classifier, which was a language identifier. And that's kind of like how I got started. And I think a lot of software engineers go through that path as well, where they just stumble into a problem that's hard to solve with traditional software. But yeah, I'm happy to share more. I mean, after my work at Columbia, I got really excited about machine learning, and specifically natural language processing. And I was doing research there for a few years. And then Nimrod, who is currently my co-founder at Comet, and I built a chat analytics app. It's called GroupWize, that Natalie kind of mentioned. And it started as a side fun project. Our idea was, there's these active group chats on WhatsApp and Viber and Line and GroupMe, and there's so much going on there. Our idea was to try to collect that data and analyze and bring interesting metrics and entertaining metrics to our users. So, such as within a group chat, who talks most about sports, who's the funniest, who are the best friends. And we started building that from scratch, really as a side project. And when we released it, it blew up very quickly. It hit 80,000 users the first week, completely organic, just by people downloading it, taking screenshots of the metrics and sharing it to the next group. But that was really my first experience in deploying these models in production, and what does that mean? But I'm happy to go and share more details, of course.
Yeah, no, that's impressive. Is that what led you to Google? How did you sort of ended up at Google, and what did you do there? Just curious.
Yeah, so my experience with natural language processing, and it definitely kind of got me closer to that. If originally I thought I'll have a career in software, after working on at Columbia and in GroupWize, I'm super excited about that. And then I joined a team at Google that was working on hate speech detection on YouTube comments. So I think now traditionally that's part of the YouTube organization, but at the time it was part of what's called the abuse organization. So fighting abuse across all Google products. And specifically my team was working on reducing the hate speech on YouTube comments, which is, for everyone who uses YouTube, know how hard that is. There's just quite a lot of it. So I worked on that there. The team already had a model in production when I came in, and kind of part of my work was to try to improve it. And I brought a lot of experience with document classification, which is essentially the technical term for hate speech detection. That's what you're trying to do. And that was a huge learning for me, both from like a machine learning scientific perspective, but really more than anything, and just like what does it mean to build these products and projects within a large organization and in that kind of scale.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. That's absolutely impressive. Now, sort of going from Google into sort of finding your own startup, can you tell us what's got you thinking about building Comet and what how did that idea happen?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mentioned I started working on ML at Columbia, and then I was asking the other kind of PhD grad students, like, what tools do you use? What does your process look like? This was completely new for me. And they didn't have much. And I assumed, I attributed to just being in academia. And then when working on GroupWize, Nimrod kept kind of criticizing in a fun way. It was like, this is the tools you use. This is how you run your process. This doesn't make a lot of sense. And then when I joined Google, I realized it's the exactly same thing even there, right? And this was a few years ago. They're definitely kind of advanced since, but a lot of these machine learning teams look like what software engineering teams look like 10 or 15 years ago, right? So in the software world, we have this amazing stack, databases, testing, monitoring, CI/CD, like each one like $1 billion industry at least. But then you go to machine learning teams and they're emailing Jupyter notebooks to each other. And from my experience at Google, that really slowed us down, because essentially what happened, without going like too much into detail, is the team has been pursuing like a research avenue for almost 6 months that turned out to be completely wrong. And it's all because there was no system of record. So everyone assumed someone checked something and they didn't. And it's coming from Google, arguably the company with the best developer practices in the world. That was very surprising. So after I witnessed it there, I called Nimrod and I said, hey, I'm at Google. It's exactly the same thing we witnessed. We really got to fix this. And that's kind of like how we started Comet.
No, that's really interesting. And how did you come up with your name for Comet?
Well, that's that's a fun story. So we went through the process, and I can get into that a little bit later, but how do we get to the exact notion of what Comet is? So at first we didn't we were kind of testing a few things, and then when we eventually kind of landed on that, we were looking for a name. There's a lot of tools and solutions in the machine learning world that kind of use names borrowed from like space. You have Jupyter notebooks, right, and things like that. So Comet.ai was the domain was available. Long story short, we're now Comet.ml, but that's essentially, it wasn't like this crazy brainstorming session or anything like that. We're more focused on the product rather than the name.
Makes sense. So you talked to your partner, you saw some inefficiencies in how the operations is around machine learning and data scientists working the old-fashioned way. Where did you go from there? Did you build a POC with your co-founder? How did you approach the first step?
So, I felt the pain myself as like the end user of this product, but there was a lot of pain points. It wasn't just what we're solving today, right? And there still are, by the way. And our approach was like, we didn't know at the start what's the exact solution, right? What do we need to do? And there's a lot of factors to it. So after lots of so we interviewed over, I think, 150 data scientists, just asking them about their workflow. How do you do things? How do you track them? How do you deploy? Really all the questions that cover the entire workflow. And there was definitely kind of a few themes that came out of that. But after all this kind of research work, we were still left with two similar products, kind of very same vision, but like similar, different variations of the same product. And we weren't sure which one is the right one to go to market with. So we actually tested that. So we bought two domains. It was trackml.com and gatherml.com. We built two landing pages of these products. So just UI, no real product, just mock-ups. And we drove traffic to these landing pages. And we just essentially A/B tested it. And after the A/B test, it was very clear that was, I think at the time, was Track.ml. That was the better variation, and that essentially turned out to what Comet is today.
And what was Track.ml? What was that page?
Yeah, so Track.ml, it was just mock-ups of essentially what a very, very, very early version of Comet. It was more focused on managing experimentation and tracking experimentation, where GatherML was more focused on, I would say, more kind of like the collaboration, the sharing of things. Both parts of the product today, but it was more emphasized on GatherML.
Makes sense. So for our audience, can you describe in simple terms, what is Comet.ml? What does your product, your platform, and a company does?
Definitely. So we provide a machine learning platform, right? So it could be self-hosted by the customer or cloud-based where we host it. And essentially we work with data scientists and data science teams, and our platform allows them to kind of track, compare, explain, and optimize their experiments and models. So we solve problems around reproducibility of being able to create the same experiment and model the second time, collaboration of this team, and really just the productivity and being able to help these teams get to production with a successful model faster. We are not, so we're completely like agnostic to the underlying use case because we're a code first platform. So we support, some of the best and biggest machine learning teams in the world in healthcare, in tech, in media, and finance. Just to name a few, we work with Google, with Ancestry, National Institute of Health, Etsy, Zappos, a lot of these companies. And they use Comet as essentially their main development platform to build these models.
Got it. So I guess your first use case was, can we reproduce our experiments, right? And I'm sure since then you've sort of grown into other things and have added more. So when you build that out, did you look around to see if there's anyone else who's trying to solve the same problem or building a similar application?
Definitely. We've done a lot of market research at the time. And essentially what existed back then is you had companies, startups, that essentially try to solve all the problems in the machine learning workflow, right? So experimentation management, model management, orchestration, deployment, monitoring. And we looked at these companies and we said, like, that is too much scope for one software company to build, right? It's like if you go to a software engineer and say, hey, here's a web login and it's going to replace GitHub, AWS, Circle CI, Datadog. It just seems very unreasonable, right? And at the time, that was early, so it made sense for these companies. But when we looked at it, we said, okay, they're doing part of what we want to do, but they also do a million other things. So we're going to do one thing and we're going to do it better than anyone else. So that was our approach, and still is. Essentially, we betted on best of breeds versus end-to-end.
You're making a very, very important point. Now I'll add my comment and then you can go, Natalie. You just mentioned something that's so important, because one thing I have seen that differentiates a successful startup from a startup that's not successful is focus on one thing and doing that one thing 10x better than anyone else out there. What I've seen, the ones that are not successful get into, even if they're somewhat successful, right? It ends up becoming mediocre if they try to solve the whole supply chain around the problem instead of solving on one problem and focusing on that. So that's a great point, and I think great learning that our listeners can take from here is just focus on one thing, and it doesn't matter how small niche focus that one thing is. If you can do it 10x better and scale, then just do that. So that's an excellent point. I really like that. With that, Natalie, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a great point, Ari. And I wanted to ask, so it seems like as you were in Google and maybe transitioning out and beginning and building your own company, you had a pretty clear vision of where you were heading, your niche market. Did you experience, though, any challenges as you were developing Comet.ml?
Well, we experience challenges on a daily basis, right? It's never
Exactly.
easy. There's just, there's many, many challenges across the board, right? Product, marketing, sales. I mean, is there anything specific that you're interested about? A specific period? It's been, like Ari said earlier, like building a startup is never a smooth sail. It's constant challenges and learnings. So I'm happy to go into detail, but there's just so many, right?
I think your biggest challenge that you've experienced from leaving Google, maybe more of like you had your job, you had that security, to diving into your own business and really developing a team and, you know, growing and expanding. What has been like a big challenge in really embarking on that process and journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges, and I think that's natural, was, you know, finding product market fit. And we are slightly different, I think, than a lot of other startups. I think a lot of startups are trying to disrupt an existing industry, right? They come in and say, this is inefficient. This is, you know, these big companies are trying to do it the wrong way. We're going to come in and make it, like, you know, much better, like, you know, Uber disrupting the taxi industry, right? But we operate in a nascent market. So we're really growing with the market, and things are shifting and changing by the day. We're not replacing legacy systems. We're building literally software for teams that have been, you know, hired a year or 2 years ago. So from that perspective, as you think from a product market fit perspective, you want to be able to, of course, build a product that people are happy about and will be willing to pay money for. But you have to think ahead, because the market's shifting all the time. And if you solve their pain point today, and that pain point is not going to exist in a year because some of the other market dynamics are changing, that's obviously a huge risk. So that was super tricky. And that goes back to what Ari mentioned of like being focused. And it takes so much discipline, right? Because you go speak to these teams that are very early and they say, you know, I definitely have that pain point that you're solving around experimentation management and tracking and visibility, but I also have like these 5 others. And if you build that, I will pay you a lot of money, right? But again, that's where the discipline piece comes in, where you have to say, I will pass on that opportunity right now because I know in the long term, if I will build all these things, there's no way I'll be able to stay competitive. Does that make sense?
Yep. Definitely. So on those lines, right? So when you have your, say, minimum viable product built, how did you go to market? Did you go to one specific client and say, let's just start with that one? Did you have an industry focus? How did you break into the market, and what was that market?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, things have shifted since we started, but originally we just essentially launched it. I mean, we built a SaaS product. We gave everyone access with sign up. Wasn't behind a demo sign up link or anything like that. You could have just signed up and started using the product. We announced our kind of first fundraise with it, and we continued to drive traffic into the website. So people had access to it from like the very, very early days. And quite frankly, we shipped a product that it wasn't mature enough to be shipped, right? And I think that's the right decision. I'm just saying, like, there was definitely a lot of people that signed up and say, hey, like, I like the idea, but like there's like 10 things that are not working as the way I expect them to, right? And since then, that's just how we kind of drove our roadmap and improved the product based on that feedback. So we are very lucky that even though we're much more enterprise focused today, we have this huge community now, over 15,000 data scientists using the product that give us continuous feedback. But really our original go-to-market was like, put it out there, make some noise and announce it on kind of all the different platforms, social media, Hacker News, Reddit, TechCrunch, and so on. And that was kind of like the original approach. Since then, of course, things have shifted.
Yeah. So it seems like it was more grassroots, where you build a good product for data scientists and you got the word out to the data scientists and they started using it. There was
Definitely.
no sort of an industry focus, or you said, let's knock at these clients' doors and see if we can get their data scientists on.
We did talk to clients through introduction and such, but the main focus was the grassroots focus. But what was interesting is very quickly, as in like a week after we launched the product, we would get emails from data scientists and machine learning engineers working at very big companies saying like, hey, I signed up, I love this thing. Can you demo this to my manager? Can you demo this to my team? And that's how we essentially got pulled into the kind of like the enterprise customers that we have. So even today, over 90% of our enterprise customers started as community users. So that essentially has been our funnel since.
Yeah. So speaking of that, right, I just want to get an understanding of how your market has evolved, because it's you, and you touched on it earlier, right? You got into an industry, you got into that was just in its very, very early stages, right? And it's shaping and evolving very, very quickly.
Mhm.
So I want to get a sense of how your market has evolved, and then as a result, how your product has evolved to meet that.
Yeah. So again, when we started, it was really all these end-to-end solutions, and often when we go and speak to these larger companies, we say, well, look, we like what you're doing and we think you're better, but these guys are doing all these 10 other things for us. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for us, right? But we stay disciplined and stuck to our vision that it will become a best of breeds market. And over the last 3 years, that's essentially what's happened, right? Where you see there's many other companies and startups in adjacent spaces, whether it's like data set management or orchestration or deployment, and they're coming with their 10x solution, right? So that was the biggest shift of the market, where we're seeing companies adopt best of breeds versus end to end. That was the biggest change. Another thing that kind of shifted is, I think originally we were working and seeing a lot of these POC use cases of AI, right? Machine learning, center of excellence, innovation centers, just playing around, building models, trying to figure out what can they do with that. But more recently, and this is very industry dependent, right? There's some industry that have been ahead, but more recently we're seeing like real models that bring real business value. And when you work with these teams, their requirements are not identical to that innovation center or the grad student, right? There's definitely things that are shared, but they're focused on bringing business value, and therefore there's a lot of things that are different, right? Whether it's understanding the model results so you can explain it to a business stakeholder. It's about lineage and understanding the entire life cycle so you can answer a question if something goes wrong, and really being able to move faster and deploy these models fairly quickly, rather than like a grad student that writes a paper, build the last model, releases the paper, and probably doesn't touch it ever again.
Yeah.
And is there a specific industry that uses your product the most, like since you started Comet?
So we're pretty agnostic. I mean, we do have customers across industries. Another way to think about it is not industry-wise, but use case-wise. So we definitely see more deep learning use cases. So computer vision, natural language processing, speech recognition, robotics. But we also, we do have people working in traditional ML with tabular data. So I would say like, a big chunk of our customers are in the more advanced use cases of deep learning. But again, like financial services, tech, media, healthcare, like very, very agnostic. And I think that surprises people, speaking about focus. But when you think about the software engineering world, right? Software is software. Honestly, it doesn't matter if you're using GitHub to version, space shuttle code or a web app code. It's code, right? So that's how we view it.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. I'm going to ask you about sort of, because I've seen some products out there in marketplace as a data scientist myself, right? There is Domino Data Labs. I'm sure you're familiar with it, and they try to do a lot of things, from helping you manage infrastructure to collaboration and model management. I just want to get a sense of how you complement them, or where there's an overlap. How do you fit in that big data science lifecycle management?
Yeah, so that's a great example. So when we started, the two players that are out there were end-to-end. It was Domino Data Labs and Data IQ, right? So Domino was really that company that I was referring to earlier, where they're doing a lot of things, right? So Domino will manage your orchestration, your data pipelines, your data warehouse, your experimentation, your productionization, your monitoring, some dashboards, and now Spark clusters, right? And I think that's a great fit for some companies, usually those that don't have any technical knowledge within the company. So, but our focus is, like I said, we don't do all of these things, right? So we focus on experimentation management, or visibility, collaboration, explaining these models, understanding why one model is better than the other, like way, way deeper into the modeling process, where I think, some of these other companies are tracking basic metrics and hyperparameters. But we don't do everything they do. So we actually have quite a few customers that are shared with these other companies. And typically, like, they just use it on top of Domino, where kind of Domino is the underlying DevOps, so orchestration and CI/CD. And if they're into like deep modeling, they use Comet for these use cases.
Interesting. No, that's actually a really sort of a good fit, because I felt that was sort of one thing that's the missing, or at least not at the level at which Comet is doing. That's awesome. Now, as you look at the future of Comet, and as you think about where you're going to be, say 3 to 5 years from now, how do you see your company evolving? What is that vision?
Yeah, definitely. So, like, look, we thrive to be the de facto operating system for machine learning, within enterprise, and really helping our customers to bring the business value with AI. So we're very much focused on these business-driven machine learning teams rather than these grad students and center of excellence. And by the way, we love these guys. We give them the product for free, but that's not our focus in the future. So really, like, another way of thinking about it, how you walk into a room of software engineers, there's usually like a TV showing your build system and another TV showing your servers in production. So our vision really is like, within a few years, you're going to have another TV right next to it showing your experiments, showing your models. That, of course, will be driven by Comet. So still working on the TV view, but hopefully after we all go back to the office, they'll be out there.
No, that's great. And do you have any advice for industry leaders today?
Industry leaders in machine learning?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest open questions we have as an industry is, where does the machine learning and data science team organization fit in the larger organization, or like the larger enterprise, right? And we've seen across our customers very different ways to do that. Sometimes it's almost like an internal consultancy giving services. Sometimes it's every team have a couple data scientists. Sometimes it's part of the product team. And I think that's the biggest thing we have to figure out, because we have this amazing tool set that can bring insane value, like we've seen with some of our customers, like pushing revenue, and I'm talking about billions of dollars with a few percent points with a single model. It's like amazing, right? Self-driving cars, there's just like amazing things out there. So I think the biggest question for us is, how do we put the data science, a person that knows what's possible with AI, and the business stakeholder to understand what needs to be solved and find that intersection, right, of these problems that are important and solvable with AI. So that's one of the biggest questions, and something we're thinking about like a lot at Comet, and trying to figure out how the product can help to do that. But it's definitely still an open question.
Yeah, you make a good point. And since you're about machine learning ops, let me ask you more of a business operating model question around data science and machine learning. I've seen a couple different scenarios, right? I've seen where data science is done in silo, where each business function has their own set of data scientists working within. And then I've seen those, what you call the center of excellence and innovation centers, where all of the data science is centralized. As you look at what's working and what's successful, especially given your exposure to companies that have models in production, that with real value, is there sort of from an operating model standpoint, is there a model that you think works? What is the optimum here?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say that typically when we see this like center of excellence that's trying to give services to different teams, that except in financial services where it's a little bit different, we haven't seen that model super successful. So where it is successful is one of the options that you mentioned, where the data scientists are part of the group, right? So part of the business team. Another option is where they're really like part of the product team. And it really depends on the industry, right? If you're trying to predict churn or forecast revenue or something like that, then it doesn't make sense. But if you're working on a product, then it's very important to keep that machine learning team within the product. But the thing that matters the most is having, whether it's a product manager that owns it, whether it's like, the CEO, but having them sitting in the same table as the person that knows what's doable with machine learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense, right? And again, it's very consistent with what I've learned doing this as well. What works as you think about standardizing and centralizing, right? It would be the tools, best practices that you probably want to bring in a central place and it manage it across the enterprise, while have the machine learning be business function specific and closer to the business
Yeah,
or the product, right? Wherever they are.
definitely. So from a tooling and platform perspective, definitely. So like a centralized platform or solution works the best. That we've seen that over and over, right?
Yeah.
And there's a few reasons to that. One is like you can share a lot of knowledge, right? So if team A is working on a modeling problem and they develop a bunch of features, team B can use that as well, even if they're working on a very different task. And it's just like, I think it's crazy like that we spend so many efforts and so many cycles and research and building these models, and a lot of these companies that lives on someone's like personal computer, right? And it's never shared, no one has access to it, and God forbid if that person leaves, all that knowledge is erased. So having a standard system of record is almost like the first step you have to make in order to be successful with AI.
Yeah. No, and for that reason, I like your enterprise solutions because you're giving them, call it the music sheet that can be used across the organization and do experimentation and tracing and management in a consistent fashion, while each business can be specific to the models they're building.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
definitely. I mean, I think the first layer is a system of record, and that's critical. It's very hard to make progress without it. But one thing we realized is once we had that and we had all the data stored in a very organized way, we built this another layer of insights on top of it, right? So it's not only just storing and tracking, but it's really giving you the insights of why one model is better than the other. What should you try next in your research project? What if there's any issues in the modeling process, you pick the wrong metric, you're looking at like distribution in the wrong way. There's a lot of pitfalls, right? So reducing the risk there is a big part of it. And then once you have that, you can also collaborate. So I can send you like a link to my experiment, say, hey, Ari, look at this. I got this result. What do you think about that? And then when you land into that page, you have full context. Like you see everything I've done, where the data came from, which parameters, which model, which algorithm, all the results. So just like extremely like significantly more productive than just setting up a meeting every time. Yeah.
That makes sense. How big are you as a company now? What is the size?
Yeah, so we're about 20 people now, and we're growing very rapidly. We're expecting to double this year. We've been hiring very aggressively as part of just our kind of like natural growth. So we have a lot of open position across the organization, go to market, engineering, product, you name it. So
Awesome. We'll let our audience visit your website if you have them listed.
definitely,
Um,
definitely.
so as we sort of get to the closing of this episode, right, I want to understand, given your experience building a successful machine learning product and then putting it out in the marketplace, what are some of the key learnings that you had as an entrepreneur that our listeners can benefit from, the future aspiring entrepreneurs?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I'll split my answer to two. When you think about like building a machine learning product or model per se, and that's I guess more for like the enterprise people out there, is like we always just take a portfolio approach. You don't know which model is going to work and which subset of the data has enough signal in it. So pick 3 or 4 different problems, quickly iterate, try to model something quickly and see where you get value, and then pursue that, rather than spending a year or two just going one way, which might be a dead end. Um, so that's in general about ML. And I think generally with startups, it really comes down to the people. It really comes down to the people. So we originally first 2 years we hired very, very slowly. It was very important for us to bring the right people. And that is a decision that paid off significantly, because you might be, it might feel like you're moving a little bit slower in the start, but once you do build that core team, you start accelerating very, very fast. So do not, in no circumstance, compromise on the quality of the people that you bring to your team. because they will like make all the difference.
That's a great advice. All right, Natalie, any other questions you have?
Yeah, I have one last question. So going back to like personally on your journey and starting a company, have you had to like really go more inwards and like shift your mindset? And because I'm sure, you know, starting your own business is a lot of pressure. There's a lot, there's all those ups and downs. And how do you manage that personally?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a huge part of it. And even though Comet is not my first business, it's still a huge part of it. So that's one thing I didn't force. People tell you startups is hard, and but I don't think I understood before that what is necessarily hard about it, right? And it's not about finding product market fit, hiring, all that stuff is hard, but it's really about, like you said, handling these ups and downs, the pressure, the stress. And everyone has their own way of managing that. Personally, for me, it's physical activity, just running. Meditation has been a huge part of it. Huge. Mindfulness in general is just a huge helper. It's almost like this entire toolkit that's been opened up to you, and it works very well. And also like learning to disconnect, right? It's a marathon. You can't work 15 hours a day and every weekend. It's just not sustainable. So being able to disconnect, putting Slack away, putting your phone away for a few hours, it's just, it's very important.
Yeah, that's valuable information. It's really finding that personal and work-life balance.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, great advice indeed. All right. Hey, this was super informational. Gideon, thank you for taking the time to be with us. And I know you're a very, very busy guy. So really appreciate you coming on and talking to us and sharing your experience and learnings. Much appreciated.
Definitely. Ari, thank you. And Natalie, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this. And I think you guys are working on something super important, because just sharing that knowledge across entrepreneurs, across startups, it's, I think, something the industry deeply needs. So thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm honored to be here.